And as we've been reporting, President Trump is in Camp David this weekend as his administration focuses on Iran. And meanwhile, the U.S. has had an official defense secretary, has not had one since December. And the president plans to nominate Army Chief Mark Esper to fill the role. Well, this comes after acting Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan withdrew last week. At the same time, President Trump is sending 1,000 more troops to the Middle East after tensions escalated with Iran across the region. Niall Stanage joins me now to talk more about this. He's a White House columnist for The Hill. So now I want to start with Iran. The folks that you've talked to, where do they see this heading? Is there a sense?
There isn't a great sense because President Trump is so inherently unpredictable. Obviously, his language about Iran up to now has been quite belligerent, but that belligerence hasn't been reflected in deeds. He pulled back from that attack. And Nicole mentioned the Make Iran Great Again, a rather unexpected slogan this morning.
Yeah.
So when you have that level of unpredictability, it's very difficult to work out where things are headed.
You know, now it was interesting. On his way out, he had something to say about John Bolton, his national security advisor. I want to play for you that bite of what the president had to say.
I have John Bolton, who I would definitely say is a hawk, and I have other people that are on the other side of the equation, and ultimately I make the decision, so it doesn't matter. But I want, for instance, I disagreed very much with John Bolton. His attitude on the Middle East and Iraq was going into Iraq. I think that was a big mistake. I think I've been proven right, but I've been against that forever. John Bolton is doing a very good job, but he takes generally a tough posture. But I have other people that don't take that posture. But the only one that matters is me.
Only one that matters is me. He said from the start he doesn't want to get caught up in these endless wars. Were you kind of surprised that he called out Bolton today?
I was surprised that he called him out in as strong terms as that. If you were John Bolton, you wouldn't be thinking that was great for your job security to be hammered in that kind of way. But this has been a constant theme of the Trump presidency. He doesn't like the idea that other people are pulling the strings, whether that was on domestic policy like Steve Bannon during his first year or now with John Bolton. The last remark you played there, I'm the only one that matters. That's very important, I think, to President Trump's self-image, really.
You know, some Iranian sources that I've spoken to have said that the president has tried to have some sort of dialogue with the Iranians, that he does want them to come to the table. And we even heard him there that he's hoping that maybe that could be something that happens. What do you think it would take, you know, the fact that the U.S. has pulled out from the Iran nuclear deal? Is it just easing up on sanctions? Is that enough for there to be some sort of diplomatic situation that could take over here?
I think in almost any situation like this, what you're looking for is a virtuous circle rather than a vicious circle, right? Can you de-escalate? Can you dial things down? If there was an easing up of the sanctions, that would be one obvious way to do that. But you could do it rhetorically as well. You could just soften the language around this issue. The danger that I think a lot of people have seen in the past few days has been exactly the opposite, this kind of cycle of escalation, increasing tensions, and the danger that people will just misjudge where the line is there and end up in a conflict. You
know, the president, we know, is set to head to the G20 summit. He'll meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin. What do you think is going to be top of his list there? Do you think election meddling with elections next year will be on tap? And also, you know, the Russians have been working with Iran, so there's a lot there to discuss.
There is, absolutely. I think the election meddling would be on the agenda were it any other president, but President Trump has already talked about the fact that, again, he doesn't want to make an enemy of Russia. He wants to have good relations with Russia. The history we don't really have time to go into in this segment, but I mean, there's a long history of President Trump downplaying election meddling, so I don't expect that to be a particularly prominent issue.
We know that he's also set to meet with Chinese President Xi. Got this trade dispute going on between the two nations. We know she also had this huge summit, met with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. The president's trying to move forward also on North Korea. What do you think they'll discuss? And what's top of is it trade, pretty much?
I think it is. I think trade is really topic A there because it has been such a huge issue and it has been a worsening issue. And I think both sides are beginning to see the costs inherent in that, the dangers, not just from the Chinese side, but for President Trump. Obviously, his re-election campaign is beginning to ramp up now. He doesn't necessarily want that to be dogged by economic suffering that might occur as a result of tariffs.
You know, now when we look back at this past week in politics, something that really surprised me was despite all this tension with Iran, despite the incident in the Strait of Hormuz, the stock market closed up yesterday. And, you know, the president, when he was on his way to Camp David this morning, on Saturday morning, had this to say. He said that stock market is on track to have the best June in over 50 years. Is that the biggest winning strategy for anybody at this point, particularly the president, that he's got the economy on his side? Yeah,
I mean, the economy is definitely his strongest calling card. If I could predict the next movement in the stock market, I'd be a lot richer than I actually am. But it is a fact that the stock market and the broader economy has performed very strongly. Unemployment at a very low level, historically speaking. And as President Trump constantly emphasizes, unemployment for other groups, be it African Americans or women, also at low levels. He's using that as really a pillar on which he can build his case for re-election.
You know, the president has a lot of options of where he could go on the weekends. Camp David isn't always a spot that he goes to. Why do you think he's headed there?
Well, there's some suggestion that there are going to be more discussions about Iran, exactly what the United States is going to do. When President Trump pulled back from that attack, he talked about it not being proportionate.
Yes.
The door is still open to a more purportedly proportionate response. And I would imagine that would be one of the items under discussion.
You know, plenty of criticism both sides on with this deal of holding out for, you know, not launching the strike. But he did ask for some sort of, I don't know if it's real-time intelligence, but he asked for specific information to guide his decision, is the reports we've heard, right? And the 150 casualties was too much. Do you give him credit for that?
I do, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think that it's a perfectly worthy thing to say the civilian casualties here would be too high to justify it, that there isn't really any rationale for doing that when, yes, the Iranians apparently shot down this drone, but that's an unmanned drone. It doesn't actually harm any human being. It is interesting that for President Trump, he has this rather bellicose approach in language, but he does tend to balk, for the most part, at military adventuring.
Niall Stanage, if we could join us now for an update.